You're not cleared for access, Mrs. Braddock. Step away from the door.
That's what Morel Santin, president of the Briarwick Cove HOA board, said just before my wife collapsed. Her voice echoed across the front steps of the clubhouse, laced with the kind of smug control only people who've weaponized rules know how to wear. The biometric scanner blinked red. Soraya's hand was still hovering in midair when her knees buckled, and Morel didn't flinch. You've been flagged as a potential liability. It's a closed decision. That word, liability, snapped something in me. Then you should know the structural risk rating of that gym is 4 years out of compliance, I said flatly. Her eyes twitched. That wasn't the kind of language she expected from someone she'd labeled a new resident. And it wasn't a guess. I'd reviewed the building permits she never bothered to update. If you're watching this, and you've got family in an HOA-controlled community, subscribe now. Because what happened next could hit your doorstep without warning. My name is Colin Braddock. I used to shut down federal military gyms and war zones for non-compliance. I can identify a load-bearing failure from a photo, and I've testified against base commanders in closed-door hearings. These people think they know rules. I audit them for a living. But this story isn't about technical code violations. Not really. It's about the last place my wife felt safe, and what it took to make sure no one else collapsed on the pavement just for trying to breathe. That scanner, the one outside the Briarwick Cove Fitness Center, was supposed to protect residents. It scanned fingerprints, logged timestamps, and offered frictionless access to the gym. What it really did was create a digital gatekeeper, one Morel controlled. Soraya was 6 months pregnant, high risk. Her OB mandated climate-controlled flat-surface cardio 5 times a week to keep her blood pressure and gestational diabetes stable. The gym was the only medically viable place for her to walk safely, and Morel blocked it, deliberately and in writing. The first time Soraya was denied access, we assumed it was a glitch. But after she called the HOA and Morel told her pregnant residents require additional review due to increased liability exposure, we knew this wasn't accidental. That morning, I walked out of the gym's side exit just in time to see my wife falter. I ran. Her palms slapped the concrete as she tried to brace the fall. Her body curled. Her hair stuck to her cheek from the heat. I screamed her name, but all I could hear was the chirping of the scanner behind me and Morel still standing there, watching. I told her she wasn't permitted. Permitted. I was already dialing 911, kneeling over my wife's crumpled form, when I saw the paramedics cross the gate. I remember thinking, not if she's okay, not if the baby's okay, just, she's still breathing, she's still breathing, she's still breathing. That scanner locked her out. But the system that gave Morel that power, that's what I was going to take apart. And I wasn't going to do it with yelling, or signs, or neighborhood protests. I was going to use every ounce of federal compliance knowledge I had, and I was going to tear their liability fortress apart from the inside. I didn't sleep the night after the collapse. The doctors said Soraya would be fine. The baby's vitals were steady, no concussion, no internal bleeding. But none of that erased the image of her lying on the pavement while Morel stood 10 feet away like she was inspecting a landscaping report. My hands still smelled like concrete and sweat and panic, and behind my eyes, I kept seeing the red blink of that scanner. I sat alone in the living room while Soraya rested, laptop open. Every HOA rulebook and neighborhood forum I could find splayed across tabs like a battlefield. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for a pattern, something to prove that what happened wasn't an isolated cruelty, but the continuation of one. It didn't take long. 3 months ago, a young mom in the same community posted anonymously in the private Facebook group, said her gym access was revoked without explanation during her 3rd trimester. No public record of it, just a one-line reply from the HOA saying it was for her safety. A year ago, a resident named Dana Lee wrote a post saying her husband, recovering from heart surgery, had been locked out of the gym after the board cited equipment liability concerns. No one ever responded, and in the most recent HOA meeting minutes, buried halfway down the 3rd page, was a single line under new policy considerations: reassessment of facility access protocols for high-risk resident categories, e.g., pregnancy, advanced age, post-operative, high risk. That's how Morel saw my wife, not as a neighbor, not as a person, but as a potential lawsuit waiting to happen. They hadn't just locked her out. They'd been doing it for years. I bookmarked every page, took screenshots of every complaint, backed it all up on 2 drives. But I needed more than digital whispers. I needed proof from someone on the inside, someone who saw what the board was doing and knew it wasn't right. That's when I remembered Ephraim. He'd been standing just behind Morel that day. Not close enough to stop what happened, but close enough to hear it. He didn't speak, didn't intervene, but the look on his face when Soraya went down, it wasn't smug, it was pale, frozen, haunted. I'd seen that look before, on soldiers who obeyed the wrong order and knew they couldn't take it back. The next morning, I passed him near the dog park. He gave a tight nod, eyes flicking to the gauze on my forearm from where I'd scraped it catching Soraya. He looked like he wanted to say something, then turned and kept walking. I didn't follow, not yet. Instead, I sent a formal request to the HOA for clarification on Soraya's gym access denial. I cited the ADA, I cited basic liability law, I cited their own bylaws, no response. I followed up with an email, still nothing. 2 hours later, a letter appeared in our mailbox. Not an apology, not an answer. Just a printed memo stamped with the HOA seal and the words, Resident Braddock is advised to cease direct challenges to board decisions. Repeated violations may result in penalties under Community Conduct Policy 7.3. Penalties. For asking why my wife was locked out of a public gym, she pays monthly dues to access. That's how Morel played. Subtle, procedural violence disguised as policy. I wasn't intimidated, but I was done playing defense. By noon, I submitted a request under Florida's sunshine laws for access to all facility modification records and board decision logs regarding biometric access control. They couldn't bury that without drawing state attention. That afternoon, I watched from my porch as Morel marched across the street in heels too high for pavement, flanked by 2 clipboard-carrying board members. They didn't knock, they dropped another envelope and left. Inside was a citation. Unauthorized disruption of community operations, formal warning issued. They were escalating, but I wasn't afraid of paper threats. I knew how this system worked, because I'd built better ones for people who carried rifles and wore flags on their shoulders. I opened my laptop again, pulled up the contractor filings for the biometric system, and started reading. If they were going to treat us like liabilities, I'd show them what an actual risk looked like. The contractor filings for the biometric scanner were thin, too thin. A system that complex should have had pages of electrical verifications, safety approvals, inspection dates. Instead, it was 2 PDFs and a signature block that looked more like a favor than a contract. And the more I studied them, the more one name kept repeating, Ephraim Jarrell. He wasn't listed as the installer. He wasn't listed as the approving engineer. He wasn't even listed as a subcontractor. But he had signed off as the facility fitness coordinator, validating modifications he never should have had authority over. His signature appeared where a licensed inspector's should have been. It jumped out like a bruise, subtle, but impossible to ignore. If he signed something he shouldn't have, then he was either protecting someone or being used. Either way, he was the crack in the wall. That evening, Briarwick Cove held its mandatory community fitness orientation, an event I normally wouldn't have cared about. But the HOA used it to parade their safety measures and justify new rules. And after Soraya's collapse, I needed to see how they tried to spin things. The clubhouse's multi-purpose room was packed. Folding chairs, lukewarm coffee, the buzzing hum of residents murmuring about fines, dues, and rumors. The air felt tightened, like everyone had sensed something boiling beneath the surface but didn't know where it would break. Morel stood at the front, wearing a coral blazer that almost dared anyone to challenge her authority. She held a binder thick enough to stun a small animal. "Thank you for attending," she began, like nothing had happened 2 days ago. "We'll start with updates regarding facility protocols, particularly recent concerns about safety risks." Concern. That's what she called what happened. My jaw tensed. Then I saw Ephraim sitting 3 chairs from the front, shoulders drawn, head angled down like he was trying to shrink into his own frame. His knee bounced under the table. His hands kept clasping and unclasping, betraying nerves. And every few seconds, he glanced at the side door, like he wished he could just walk out. I moved closer, standing near the wall behind him. Morel started explaining how the biometric system ensured uniform protection for residents. She didn't say Soraya's name, but the implication hung in the air like damp fog. The board is committed to keeping high-risk individuals safe by limiting their exposure to hazardous environments. Hazardous. She was describing treadmills, not minefields. People shifted in their seats. A couple whispered to each other. One elderly man frowned deeply. Ephraim didn't move. If anything, he shrank further. His guilt radiated in waves. When the meeting adjourned, residents filtered out, shaking their heads. Some looked frustrated, others confused. No one dared speak aloud what they were all thinking, that the HOA had crossed a line. I waited until almost everyone had left before stepping toward Ephraim. He noticed me, too late. "I know what you saw," I said quietly. "And you know it wasn't right." He froze, not in defiance, but in fear. The kind worn by someone tied to a decision they didn't make, yet would pay for if they admitted the truth. He swallowed hard, eyes flicking to the door where Morel had exited minutes before. "I didn't—" His voice cracked, then fell silent. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm not supposed to talk about internal decisions." That was an answer disguised as a refusal. "You signed off on the scanner modifications," I said. "But you're not an inspector. You don't have certification." His breath hitched, a tiny betrayal of panic. It's complicated," he whispered. Complicated was code for coerced. I stepped back, giving him space. "I'm not here to drag you into something, but my wife could have lost our child on that pavement. And you know damn well she never should have been locked out." I could see the conflict twisting inside him, pulling him in two directions. Finally, he closed his eyes, exhaled, and shook his head like he was trying to dislodge guilt from his skull. "I can't," he said, stepping away. "Not yet." Not yet. That was enough. It meant the truth was there, buried under fear, board pressure, and whatever grip Morel still had on him, but it was cracking, and cracks meant weakness. Weakness meant leverage. As he hurried out the back door, the final piece clicked into place. Morel was using people as shields, pressuring them, controlling access not just to buildings, but to their jobs, reputations, and standing in the community. That meant she was hiding something bigger. And if I wanted to tear down the wall she built, Ephraim wasn't just a witness. He was the first stone ready to fall. The notice taped to our front door was printed in bold red font, larger than usual. "Final warning," it read. "Persistent challenges to HOA authority may result in formal sanction and suspension of property access privileges. No signature, no explanation. Just the HOA seal and a thin line of smug bureaucracy etched in ink." They weren't even pretending anymore. Soraya was asleep on the couch inside, still recovering. Her ankles were swollen, and she winced every time she shifted. The doctor had ordered bed rest for at least 10 days. I hadn't told her about the warning yet. She needed peace, not paperwork war. But I stood there for a while, staring at that paper, letting the silence dig into me. They thought they could intimidate me, that they could starve us out of the system by threats and printouts. They didn't know what I'd already started. I took a long route to my truck that morning, just to pass the gym. The biometric scanner was still active, still blinking that lifeless red. It hummed faintly, like a machine breathing. Every time it lit up, I saw her body on the pavement again. I turned away, climbed in, and drove to the county administrative building. The permit archives were buried in the lower floor. Gray walls, flickering fluorescents, and a clerk who looked like he'd been waiting his whole life for someone to ask about old gym files. I handed over the HOA's facility name, contractor license number, and date of modification from the original filings I'd pulled the night before. He raised an eyebrow. "Didn't think anyone cared about gym renovations from 3 years ago." "I do," I said, "now more than ever." It took an hour, but he found what I needed, or rather, what wasn't there. The biometric scanner installation had no electrical certification. The ceiling joists above the treadmill bay hadn't been re-inspected after load-bearing modifications. And worst of all, the final safety sign-off was listed as deferred pending consultant input, with Ephraim's name in the notes, but not in the approval box. That made it worse. He hadn't signed off. Someone had cited him as cover. Morel had weaponized his title to shortcut a process that legally required a licensed engineer. She faked institutional process to create control. I requested certified copies. The clerk made them slowly, as if he knew they might end up in court. Someday. I thanked him, left, and drove straight to the post office to file an incident request with the County Risk Review Office. Then I drove home, slowly, carefully, because the more steps I took, the closer I got to the moment I'd have to bring this into the open, to the community, and to Soraya. She was sitting up when I came in, legs curled under a blanket, eyes on the television, but not really watching. "Anything?" she asked softly. I nodded, handed her a glass of water, then crouched beside the couch. They didn't finish the inspections. The biometric scanner was installed without proper authorization. The gym ceiling above the treadmills is structurally unsound, and the signature they're using to say it's safe? Ephraim's, but he never signed. She blinked, processing. Then, it's dangerous? Structurally, yes, but politically, even more. Her hand moved to her stomach. I saw her face tighten, not in fear, but in something closer to rage. A kind of slow-burning fury I hadn't seen since we'd lost our first pregnancy 4 years ago. Back then, it had been medical, no one's fault. But this was personal. "What are you going to do?" I stood slowly, walking to the window. Morel was outside again, walking the loop with 2 board members, chatting like nothing was wrong, laughing even. "I'm going to build the case, not a complaint. A certified, filed, risk-assessed case." She nodded. "Don't stop." "I won't." The next morning, I submitted my formal complaint to the county compliance office, signed, backed by permit records, inspection failures, and evidence of forged procedural authority. But I wasn't done. Because I knew something else, something Morel didn't. The biometric system, it was digital, which meant it had logs. And I was going to get them. The gym's biometric system ran on a private access platform called GateTrack, a mid-tier vendor that sold itself to HOAs and business parks as a frictionless resident authentication tool. I'd seen their systems before on military-adjacent campuses. Slick, overpriced, full of design shortcuts. But more importantly, their devices didn't just open doors. They logged every failed attempt, every override, every single administrator access. That's what I needed. I wasn't going to guess or accuse. I was going to show the scanner denying Soraya while flagged under a custom access rule someone coded in manually. And once I had that entry, time-stamped, unauthorized, and traceable, I could collapse everything Morel built. The first step was figuring out who handled Briarwick Cove's back-end access. It wasn't listed in HOA minutes or shared in board emails, but a quick DNS trace on the login portal revealed a masked domain with a regional systems manager, Enclave Access Solutions, based 40 miles north. I called under my license ID, gave my credentials, and used the same tone I'd used 100 times before when investigating liability logs for the federal government. My voice was calm, bored even. That was the trick with vendor tech reps. They weren't used to being challenged by someone who spoke their language. "I'm reviewing a facility risk escalation case and need the full log report for the biometric access point installed at Briarwick Cove HOA. I'll need the failure entries, override history, and the admin panel access timestamps." The man on the other end of the line cleared his throat. "Are you a facility contractor or a board representative?" "Neither. I'm a certified compliance assessor investigating the legality of facility denial protocols. Section 42 of your install agreement requires you to retain system access logs for audit purposes. Do I need to involve the county to get them?" Pause. Silence. A sigh. "I'll email you the records within the hour, Mr. Braddock." 45 minutes later, the file landed in my inbox. 46 pages, 6 months of access history, color-coded entries with unique hashes for every login. I ran a filter for Soraya's fingerprint ID. She'd registered it when we moved in. It appeared 27 times. 22 successful scans, 5 failed. The first failed scan happened 3 days after Morel had made her quiet safety clause comment at the meeting. But the last one, 3 days ago, was the one that mattered. The log flagged it in red. Access denied, override filter, user restricted by temporary block. Admin entry, high-risk pregnancy. Whoever had access to the system's admin panel typed that reason in manually. I scrolled to the next page. There it was. Admin login, Santinem, C6 van Offersonft Spounds, 03, AM. That was the morning my wife collapsed, 26 minutes before it happened. Morel hadn't just upheld a policy. She'd logged in and blocked my wife herself, personally, with full knowledge of the outcome. I leaned back in the chair, heart cold. This wasn't about overreach. It wasn't about caution or miscommunication. It was targeted, deliberate. I printed the pages, slid them into a file folder, and made 3 copies, one for the county inspector, one for the ADA compliance officer, and one for me. Then I grabbed my phone and texted Ephraim. I have proof. We need to talk. I'm not trying to ruin you, but this isn't just about ethics anymore. It's criminal. He didn't reply right away, but I knew he would, because he was complicit, and I was giving him the only exit left. Outside, a neighbor walked past with her toddler in a stroller. She smiled at me, not knowing anything about what had happened at the gym, or who had nearly died on the pavement that week. I smiled back, but it was hollow, because I had the proof now. And when I brought it forward, the board wouldn't be able to hide behind their rules anymore. This wasn't policy. This was tampering. And Morel Santan had left her fingerprint on the system. I didn't sleep that night, either, but this time it wasn't out of panic. It was focus, pure, clinical focus. The kind that used to keep me upright during 18-hour inspections and 120-degree heat zones. The kind that had no room for fear, only precision. The folder sat on the kitchen table in front of me, 46 pages of raw biometric system logs. Soraya's name, access denied, manual override, Morel's login credentials. It was all there, digital fingerprints on top of administrative arrogance. And it wasn't just negligence, it was evidence. Soraya came into the kitchen at sunrise, barefoot, a hand on her lower back. Her skin looked better, less pale, but her voice was hoarse when she spoke. "You've been up all night?" I nodded and turned the file around for her to see. "They logged it. Morel used the admin portal 26 minutes before your collapse. She blocked you herself. Not an automated rule, not a system quirk. It was personal." She blinked slowly, reading the line I'd highlighted in the red marker. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Then she looked at me, jaw tightening. "What happens now?" "I'm filing an official report to the state-level compliance authority," I said. "The local office can flag it, but this goes higher. ADA, county risk assessment, and vendor accountability. If this goes public before the investigation finishes, she could spin it. But if I keep the pressure quiet and methodical, she'll never see the floor collapsing beneath her." Soraya walked around the table, leaned down, and kissed my temple. "You're doing it," she whispered. "You're going to take her down." "No," I said softly. "I'm going to expose her. She'll take herself down." I left an hour later, dressed sharp, folder in hand, heading straight for the regional compliance office in Coral Bridge. The building was all concrete and glass, no charm, no warmth. Just like the people it was built to hold accountable. I met with Director Hallen, a stern woman in her 50s who'd worked everything from nursing home violations to toxic mold cover-ups in luxury condos. She scanned the top few pages, eyes narrowing. "You understand the severity of what you're presenting?" "I do. And you have backup copies?" 3. One's with an attorney friend, one in a vault. She gave a small approving nod. "Then we'll proceed, quietly. We'll contact the vendor, issue a demand for system preservation, and schedule a surprise inspection. Do not escalate this in the neighborhood. We don't want to give her time to scrub anything." I agreed, but as I walked out into the sun, I already knew there'd be a cost. The moment this moved forward, someone would feel the walls shift, and someone would panic. Back home, I found another envelope on my porch. This one wasn't printed. It was handwritten. Inside was a note, short, careful, tense. "Meet me at 6, same dog park bench. I've seen the logs. I didn't know she went that far. I'll talk." Ephraim had finally broken, and he was ready to speak. I left the note on my desk and walked out onto the porch. The air was still, the street quiet. Morel's car wasn't in her driveway, but I knew she felt something. I could feel it in the way the neighborhood buzz had changed, the way people looked at each other a little longer, the way conversations stopped when board members walked by. The foundation was shifting, and when Ephraim spoke, it wouldn't just be about scanner access or bylaws. It would be about how Morel ran the board like a private corporation, how she manipulated minutes, bypassed votes, and used fear to keep people silent. The logs gave me legal standing, but Ephraim could burn the whole thing down from the inside. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the tide turn. The bench at the dog park was half shaded by a sycamore that always seemed like it was trying to lean away from the HOA-installed spotlight nearby. Ephraim was already there when I arrived. No dog, no water bottle, just a man who looked like he'd been carrying the weight of every HOA decision on his back since the day he signed up. I didn't say anything at first. I sat down beside him and waited. Let the silence do the work. He spoke without turning. She said it was just a formality. His voice was quieter than I remembered. Not broken, just folded in on itself. She said signing my name under the scanner upgrade would save us money and time, that the contractor had cleared everything already, and the board just needed my title to rubber stamp the file. I didn't check. I didn't need to tell him I'd already pulled the permit records. He knew why I was there. He knew what I had. But hearing him say it, own it, that mattered more than anything in those 46 pages. She locked out my wife, I said. I know. She did it manually, 26 minutes before Soraya collapsed. His breath caught, a subtle shift, a confirmation. She didn't tell us, he said. Not the board, not even in private minutes. She just started accessing the panel on her own. Said she was managing liability risk directly. I didn't want to believe she'd take it that far. But you did, I said. He nodded. After the last board meeting, I started checking the log reports from the contractor portal. I wasn't supposed to. She restricted access. But I still had my old login from before the update. I saw the entries. And your wife's name. And you still didn't say anything. He looked down at his hands, fingers threaded tight like they were holding something fragile. I was scared, he said. Not of her exactly. Of what it would mean if I told the truth. Everything I helped her build, it would collapse, and people would blame me too. They still might. I know. We sat in silence again. Across the field, someone threw a ball for a retriever. Kids played on. The swings near the sidewalk. Normal life, completely unaware how close it had come to burying someone alive in red tape. I have the logs, I said, and I've already filed the first report. His head turned slightly. She won't be able to scrub anything? No. Another pause. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thumb drive. He didn't hand it to me immediately, just held it in his lap. These are the internal communications, he said. Board emails, draft minutes, chat threads from our internal Slack. She made decisions without quorum, enacted access bans that were never approved. And there's one thread where she laughs about calling pregnancy a lawsuit in sneakers. I reached out slowly. He placed the drive in my palm. It's all time-stamped, he added. You'll need to cross-reference some of it, but it's enough to prove intent, enough to show she didn't just make a bad call. She orchestrated this. What happens to you? I asked. I resign, he said without hesitation. Before the next meeting, publicly. I've already drafted the letter. I nodded, closed my hand around the drive. I'm not trying to destroy people, I said. Just end what's hurting this community. Ephraim stood. He looked taller now, lighter somehow. She already destroyed the board, he said. You're just pulling back the curtain. As he walked away, I stared at the thumb drive. One small object. But in my field, data was more than evidence. It was the blueprint of decision-making. And with that drive, I had not just the crime, but the motive, the method, the cover-up, and the smirk behind it all. Morel built her empire on fear, false authority, and silence. Ephraim just gave me the detonator. I waited until the house was quiet before I plugged the thumb drive into my workstation. Soraya was asleep upstairs, finally resting without the shadow of another threat hanging over her. Every step I took now had to be clean, traceable, and beyond reproach. This wasn't about revenge. It was about a forensic dismantling of power. The folder on the drive was labeled HOA Slack logs, internal. No passwords, no encryption. Just exported threads, time-stamped, archived, and ugly. I opened the first one. The tone was casual at first, friendly even. Back-channel chat between board members about trash bin violations and overgrown hedges. But about halfway through the second thread, things changed. Morel had posted a message to the group, Morel Santin. We need to restrict access to the gym for pregnancy cases. I'm not risking our insurance coverage just because someone wants to stay fit in their third trimester. No vote, no questions. Just a declaration. And then, Mirel Santin. If Ephraim's name is already on the file, we can roll it under his authority. He doesn't need to approve again. He won't push back. That was the moment, the pivot. From protocol to manipulation. I cross-referenced the Slack timestamps with the scanner logs. They aligned. Less than 30 minutes after that message, she logged into the GateTrack admin panel and adjusted the access filter, marking my wife as temporarily restricted. Then came the thread from 2 days after Soraya collapsed. Board member, name redacted. This is going to come back on us. Mirel Santin. Only if someone talks, and no one's that stupid. I printed everything. 3 copies again, sorted by date, indexed against the HOA charter, each violation highlighted. Then I built a new folder, conflict of interest, risk abuse timeline. That became my master file. Every entry, every log, every quote, every illegal action built on a timeline that ended with my wife lying unconscious on concrete. At noon, I emailed the regional compliance officer and requested a confidential follow-up meeting. I told him I had digital proof of board manipulation, administrative fraud, and personal injury risk escalation. At 2 p.m., I dropped off a sealed copy at the office of a journalist I knew from my work on a failed condo redevelopment years ago. I told her to hold it, embargoed. She didn't ask why. She trusted my instincts, said if the story went live, she'd run it front page. Then I went home and started drafting the board's collapse, one clause at a time. Briarwick Cove's bylaws had one exploitable flaw. Any board action taken without full quorum and recorded vote was reversible if proved fraudulent, and any board member proven to have misrepresented their authority during administrative action could trigger immediate dissolution of the sitting board. All I needed was a trigger mechanism. That's where the upcoming HOA Town Forum came in, scheduled monthly, open floor for all residents. Typically a place for petty complaints and landscaping requests, but legally, if quorum was met and formal motion was introduced, it could be used to call a vote. I wasn't going to accuse. I wasn't going to demand. I was going to introduce a motion to dissolve the board for procedural fraud, misuse of authority, and endangerment of residents. The play wasn't flashy. It was structured. It would bypass Morel's rhetoric. It would force Ephraim's testimony into the record, and if it passed, the HOA would fall before she had a chance to run damage control. At 5 p.m., I received a text from the compliance director, confirmed receipt of logs and Slack archive. Risk audit team will be deployed for unannounced site inspection within 72 hours. Coordination with county ADA officer approved. I leaned back in my chair, spine tight, fists unclenching slowly. The system was moving, not because I shouted, because I documented. Morel had spent years building a fortress out of loopholes and fear. I had just replaced the blueprints with a demolition plan. The gym was quiet when I arrived the next morning. Too quiet. No hum of treadmills, no clang of weights, no muffled footsteps across the rubberized floors. Just the soft, almost imperceptible click of the biometric scanner powering itself every few seconds. Waiting for a hand, it was no longer programmed to reject. I stood in the corner of the facility, clipboard in hand, while the county risk audit team swept the building. 2 inspectors in plain polos and steel-toe boots moved methodically from ceiling beams to electrical conduits, testing load tolerances, circuit insulation, ventilation flow. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. They were here because of me, because I'd built the file too tight to ignore. And now, for the first time since this war started, I wasn't the one doing the heavy lifting. An hour in, one of the inspectors pointed to the ceiling above the cardio bay. "You see that?" he asked his partner. "Joist spacing's too wide for the new rig mounts. No secondary supports. If that setup vibrates hard enough, it shifts." The other guy frowned. "And the mounts weren't even certified. Look at the welds. No inspection tags." They were speaking softly, but the words were landing like hammers. "Document it," I said. "Everything." Behind me, the ADA officer was reviewing the biometric scanner's positioning, her tape measure stretched along the wall. "No lowered interface," she muttered. "Fails ADA height compliance. No braille backup panel, no alternative entry access for impaired mobility. That's 3 federal violations before we even check the override protocol. She turned to me. You said your wife was denied access while pregnant. Did she request accommodation? She was never given the chance. That was enough. The officer nodded once and kept measuring. The audit wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But I could feel the screws tightening around the board's neck with every clipboard note and quiet photo flash. By the time we wrapped, the inspectors had found 7 structural violations, 3 ADA failures, and multiple fire code blind spots in the ceiling design. And we hadn't even touched the administrative misconduct yet. I walked them out, gave each a copy of my report, thanked them, and headed straight to the community cafe on the corner of Harland and Wilkes. That's where I'd asked the 3 neighbors I trusted most to meet me, Rhonda, Samir, and Dennis. Between the 4 of us, we covered every block of the neighborhood and had seen Morell's power plays in different forms. I brought a printed summary of the findings and laid it on the table like an unlit stick of dynamite. She's going to fight this, Rhonda said, flipping through the pages. I know. She'll spin it as technical errors, old permits, miscommunication. She can try, I said, but we don't need her to admit anything. We just need to trigger a vote. Samir leaned forward. You're going to use the open forum. Yes, it's the only way to bypass her control of meeting agendas. If I introduce a formal motion with the proper clause cited and we meet quorum, it forces a vote. Dennis shook his head, half in disbelief. You're playing her own system against her. She wrote this system, I said, but I read the fine print. We made our plan. Each of them would rally 5 residents. Those 5 would each bring 2 more. We'd pack the next forum, quietly. No flyers, no calls, just handshakes, door knocks, and whispered confirmations. Enough to meet quorum, enough to bring the motion forward. I spent the rest of the afternoon at my desk prepping the language of the motion. It had to be precise. Procedural fraud, misuse of administrative authority, direct endangerment, and violation of federal access law. Ephraim's resignation would be the final nail. If he read his letter aloud, it would become part of the official record. By sundown, I had the files printed, collated, and paper-clipped into legal packs. One for the forum moderator, one for public review, one to deliver to Morell, face-to-face, if she tried to interrupt the motion. That night, I sat next to Soraya on the porch. The air was still. The scanner light across the gym pulsed softly in the dark. You ready? She asked. I was born ready, I said, but now I'm finally armed. I walked into the Briarwick Cove Community Forum that night with 2 things in my bag, a manila folder and a sealed letter. The folder held the motion I was about to introduce. The letter held Ephraim's resignation and statement, his full confession, signed and time-stamped. Both were enough to turn the room, but I still wasn't sure how far the ripple would go. The clubhouse was crowded. Word had spread, though no one said how. People filled the folding chairs, stood along the back walls, leaned in doorways. Even the neighbors I'd never seen at meetings before had shown up. The ones Morell always assumed were too passive, too polite, too grateful just to be here, not tonight. Morell stood at the head of the table, blazer crisp, smile sharp, eyes scanning for any sign of disruption. When she saw me step forward, her expression flickered, just once, then reset. Mr. Braddock, she said smoothly, voice amplified through the portable speaker at her side. You're welcome to address the board during open comments, time limited to... I'm not here for comments, I said, pulling the microphone cord from the receiver and letting it hang. I'm here to introduce a formal motion under Clause 9.2.3 of the Briarwick Cove Charter. The room went still. Morell blinked. That clause pertains to dissolution of the sitting board in the event of procedural fraud and endangerment of residents, I said. Yes, I know exactly what it pertains to. I opened the folder and laid the motion paperwork on the table in front of the moderator, a neutral third-party resident elected to oversee. Procedural integrity during community votes. I submit this motion, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, on the grounds that the board, under the leadership of Mireille Santin, knowingly bypassed inspection protocols, misrepresented access restriction authority, and imposed a medically harmful policy without quorum, board vote, or resident awareness. The moderator picked up the paperwork, eyes scanning fast, his brow furrowed. Morrell let out a short, tight laugh. "Mr. Braddock, this isn't a courtroom. You're not an attorney." "No," I said, "but I am a certified compliance assessor, and your scanner denied my pregnant wife access to the only safe walking facility in this community. 26 minutes later, she collapsed. Your login, your override, your administrative fingerprint on a system you installed without full board approval or proper inspections." She tried to speak, but I didn't stop. "Furthermore," I continued, pulling out the sealed envelope, "I present the resignation and formal testimony of Ephraim Jorrell, HOA Vice President. Included are Slack logs, internal emails, and proof of intentional procedural fraud. He will not be present tonight, but his statement is signed and notarized." The moderator opened it carefully. The room was dead silent except for the soft crinkle of paper. Morrell's face had gone pale. She opened her mouth again, but before she could speak, Rhonda, sitting near the front, stood up. "I second the motion," she said, then Samir. Third, then Dennis. Fourth. The moderator looked stunned. He turned to the crowd. "Do we have quorum?" Hands went up. Dozens. "We do," he said. "Motion is accepted and will proceed to vote." Morrell stood frozen, lips parted, eyes darting from one resident to the next, like she couldn't quite believe they were turning on her. For a moment, I thought she might try to shout something, declare a technicality, demand delay. But she didn't. She sat down. Her blazer still looked sharp, her posture still perfect. But her authority, her unshakable aura of control, was cracked now, and the cracks were growing. The moderator read the motion aloud. The vote was cast. And as the ballots came in, the board members, every last one of them, sat silent. By the end of the count, the decision was unanimous. Motion passed, board dissolved. Immediate restructuring initiated under Charter Emergency Provision 12.1. I didn't speak again. I just watched as Morrell's world, built on policies, loopholes, and whispered threats, collapsed in the very room where she once ruled it. The next morning, I returned to the gym, not to use it, but to watch it change. A neon orange sign hung on the glass doors now. Facility closed pending safety review. County Compliance Division. Yellow caution tape stretched across the entrance like a borderline between past abuse and future repair. It was the first time I'd seen the scanner, completely dark, its idle pulse gone. No hum, no denial, just silence. A few neighbors passed by, slowing down to glance at the tape. Most nodded, a few offered quiet thumbs up. One elderly man clapped me on the shoulder and muttered, "Took too long, but you did it." I didn't respond. I wasn't done yet. Back at home, my inbox was full. Compliance follow-ups, transition documentation requests, vendor notices confirming contract suspensions. But one email stood out. The subject line was short. From Ephraim Jorrell. Subject, I watched it, I opened it. You did what I never had the courage to do. They voted without hesitation. I read the motion twice before I realized what it meant. You didn't just end her control. You gave the whole neighborhood a way out. I'm sorry it took so long. I'll be finishing my resignation paperwork today. I've started speaking to the new interim committee. They want me to help repair the inspection process. Maybe this time, I'll do it right. E. I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of those words settle into me. I hadn't realized how badly I needed them. By noon, the newly formed Community Oversight Committee, temporary but empowered by the Charter, scheduled an emergency review of all shared facilities. Morrell hadn't attended the board dissolution wrap-up. She'd submitted a typed statement through a lawyer and vacated her HOA-owned office that morning. No apology, no comment. But she was gone. Later that day, I met with the interim committee at the cafe. We sat around a small corner table with copies of the risk reports and a printed plan I'd prepared. A 3-phase inspection and repair cycle, starting with the gym and moving through the clubhouse, pool deck, and clubhouse annex. This wasn't just about structural repair. It was about policy repair, rebuilding trust. I handed over all the documentation, inspection findings, scanner logs, Slack transcripts, formally transferred from investigative materials to permanent HOA record archives. We'll need a new access system, one of the members said. Transparent, something that logs entries but doesn't gatekeep based on board discretion. I nodded. I have vendors I can recommend, and I'll oversee the implementation myself, if you'll let me." They agreed without hesitation. We set the date for the next community-wide vote, 30 days from now. The goal was simple: ratify a new bylaw system that prevented closed-door policy changes, required recorded votes for all resident-impacting decisions, and guaranteed ADA-compliant facility operations. A few hours later, I returned home to find Soraya sitting on the porch. She had a hand on her belly and a smile I hadn't seen in weeks, a real one. She looked up as I walked toward her. "Gym's shut down?" she asked. "For now. And Morel, gone, officially." Soraya leaned back and exhaled deeply, her shoulders dropping. "So, that's it?" I sat beside her and shook my head. That was the demolition. Now comes the rebuild. We sat in silence for a moment, the neighborhood unusually still. For once, the quiet didn't feel oppressive. It felt earned. Then, slowly, she reached into her bag and pulled out her gym fob, the same one that had been rejected the day she collapsed. She held it in her hand, looked at it for a moment, and then smiled. "You think they'll ever switch this thing back on?" I smiled too. "They'll switch it back on," I said. "But this time, it'll answer to the community, not a single name at the top." 3 weeks later, the gym reopened. No ribbon-cutting ceremony, no fanfare, just the sound of an automatic door sliding open and a quiet beep from a new scanner that finally worked the way it should have all along. I stood near the entrance as the first few residents trickled in, scanning their fingers, watching the green light blink for everyone. No denials, no locked-out names, just access. Equal, simple, silent. Soraya stood beside me, holding the new membership fob. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and citrus disinfectant. She looked nervous at first, glancing at the floor where she'd fallen weeks ago. The tile had been replaced, spotless now, like the moment had never existed. But I saw her hesitate, one brief tremor of memory, of fear. Then she stepped forward, pressed her finger to the scanner, and waited. The machine chirped once. The door clicked open. The light turned green. That sound, the one simple tone, felt louder than any applause I could have imagined. She turned to me and smiled, tears pooling just enough to blur her lashes. "We're really done with them, aren't we?" I nodded. "They can't touch us anymore." Behind her, a few residents had gathered. Rhonda with her teenage daughter, Samir pushing his father in a wheelchair, Dennis carrying a clipboard of sign-ups. No one was whispering, no one was glancing over their shoulder for bored eyes. The gym was no longer a territory of rules. It was a place again, a shared space, not a restricted zone. As Soraya started her slow walk on the treadmill, I stepped back, leaning against the doorway. The hum of the machines came alive again, a low, steady rhythm, the kind of sound that made you feel like things could finally start moving forward. Across the lobby, the new interim committee had replaced the framed Board of Directors plaque with something else entirely, a small bronze plate engraved with 7 words. "This facility exists for all residents equally." It wasn't flashy, it wasn't meant to be, but it was permanent. Later that afternoon, I stood before the committee one last time to finalize the new safety charter. My risk assessment work was done, but they asked me to stay on as a volunteer compliance advisor. I declined at first, told them I'd done my part. But as I looked around the table, at the new faces and fresh energy, I realized it wasn't about paperwork anymore. It was about making sure no one like Morel ever got to rewrite the rules again. So I agreed, not as an enforcer, as a guardian. When I came home, Soraya was sitting on the porch again, the setting sun catching the soft round of her stomach. The doctor said the baby was strong, the stress was gone, her blood pressure stable, and she'd even been cleared for daily walks. It felt like the universe had finally stopped pressing down on us. "You know," she said quietly, "when I fell that day, I thought it was over. Not just the pregnancy, everything. I thought she'd won." "She almost did," I admitted. "If we'd stayed quiet, she would have." Soraya looked out toward the gym, its windows glinting gold in the fading light. "You think she's still in town?" "Doesn't matter," I said. "Her name's a ghost here now." She smiled faintly, then rubbed her stomach. "You think he'll grow up knowing what you did?" "He won't need to," I said. "He'll just grow up free." A breeze swept through the yard. The chime by our front step jingled softly, the same sound I'd heard the day Soraya collapsed. only now it didn't twist in my chest. It felt like a reminder that sometimes justice doesn't shout. Sometimes it's quiet, measured, precise. That night, I filed my final report with the county. Case closed, full compliance achieved, oversight protocols established. And for the first time since moving to Briarwick Cove, I slept without a single document open beside me. In the morning, I woke to sunlight spilling across the floor, the smell of coffee, and Soraya laughing in the kitchen. She was reading messages from neighbors who joined the new committee. One had written, "Tell your husband the gym feels different now, safer, brighter." It did. Sometimes justice looks like a courtroom. Sometimes it looks like a quiet neighborhood that finally learned who it belongs to. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, if you've ever fought back when the system tried to bury you, subscribe and stay. Because this wasn't a story about revenge. It was about restoration. And there are more of these stories waiting to be told.